The October wind of 1882 swept across the Kansas prairie with merciless fury, carrying dust and desperation through Thornfield Township. The auction platform dominated the town square, its wood bleached to the color of old bones, casting a twisted shadow across the hard-packed earth. Evangeline Hartwell stood upon that platform, her chin defiantly lifted despite the coarse rope binding her wrists. At 23, she had already buried both parents and watched their homestead wither under drought. Now she faced the ultimate humiliation, being sold to satisfy debt. The auctioneer, Silas Weatherstone, clutched his leather-bound ledger. Miss Hartwell owes $83.40 to the Thornfield Mercantile and Bank. Per territorial law, her labor can be purchased to satisfy said debt. I won't beg, Evangeline thought. They can purchase my time, but they cannot touch whatever dignity I still possess. Have you ever stood at a crossroads where everything seemed lost? Remember, dignity isn't something others can take. It's something you choose to keep. The bidding began. Cornelius Briggs, who operated a boarding house with a dark reputation, bid eagerly. Evangeline's hands trembled. Then a new voice cut through the silence like a blade. $25. Garrett Thornwood. Everyone knew him, owner of the Thornwood Ranch and the town mercantile. 2 years had passed since his wife drowned in a flash flood. Since then, he'd become a man of few words and fewer smiles, moving through life like a ghost. Sold to Mr. Garrett Thornwood for $25. Evangeline felt relief poisoned with uncertainty. Garrett counted out 5 gold pieces, took the contract, and said simply, "Wagons over there, get in." They rode in complete silence for 2 hours. The prairie stretched endlessly on all sides. Evangeline's thoughts churned. I've traded one kind of prison for another, but at least I'm away from Cornelius Briggs. Whatever comes next, I'll face it. Garrett's thoughts were equally heavy. This woman is labor, nothing more. Don't feel, don't risk, not again. When they reached the ranch, Garrett outlined her duties: cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping. Then he paused. One more thing. Don't ask about the photographs. Don't touch them. Don't move them. Inside, the house felt less like a home and more like a museum. Photographs of his dead wife lined every surface. Young, dark-haired, perpetually smiling. The ghost who still ruled this place. Evangeline rolled up her sleeves and began to work, doing what she'd always done, surviving. When life strips everything away, what remains? Your ability to choose how you respond. That's where true strength lives. 3 weeks passed. Evangeline rose before dawn each day, managed the household, and discovered Garrett's bookkeeping was disorganized chaos. She created a new system, organized, efficient, saving him hours of work weekly. When Garrett saw what she'd done, surprise flickered in his eyes. "This will save me 6 hours a week." "Good. You can spend them fixing the leak in the barn roof." He looked at her then, really looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes, then died away like a match struck in the wind. In the evenings, they sat on the porch in silence, watching sunsets paint the prairie impossible colors. One night, Evangeline broke the silence. "You keep the place neat for a man who doesn't care to live in it." Garrett's voice came low and rough. "It's her ghost who keeps it neat, not me." "How long will you let her keep it?" "As long as it takes." Garrett stood abruptly and went inside. Evangeline remained on the porch, listening to crickets sing. "He bought me like a mule, but his eyes tell me he's the one bound in chains." November brought the first hard frost. Evangeline learned the ranch hands' names and Garrett's patterns. She learned his dead wife's name, Catherine. The house remained a monument to her. One morning, Evangeline watched Garrett repair fence in the bitter cold. He looked like a man carrying weight that never lightened. She poured coffee and carried it outside. "Thought you might want this," she said. He took it, surprised. "Thank you." "You do good work," he said after a moment. "The house, the books, all of it. You pay for good work. I pay for labor. You give more than that." Evangeline studied his weathered face. "You don't have to carry it alone." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I'm managing fine." "Are you?" Grief can become a prison we build ourselves, but the door is never locked from the outside, only from within. In early December, a letter arrived. Garrett's cousins were coming for dinner, a twice-monthly family tradition. Evangeline heard tension in his voice when he mentioned them. They'll expect 6 courses. They like to put on airs. If they want 6 courses, they'll have 6 courses, and they'll remember it. Evangeline spent 3 days preparing a feast. By Saturday evening, the table gleamed with polished china and silver. The meal was perfect. Venison roast, fresh bread, apple pie that perfumed the entire house. The guests arrived precisely at 6. Preston and Millicent Fairchild, Quentin and Delilah, all dressed in finery, all carrying themselves with unearned superiority. Millicent's gaze swept the room. Still keeping the place like a shrine, I see. Garrett, dear, it's been 2 years. Perhaps it's time to move forward. Garrett's face became stone. When Preston asked about Evangeline, she spoke calmly. He found me at the auction in Thornfield Township. Bought my labor contract for $25. Best investment he's made this season, judging by the state his accounts were in. Silence fell like snow. As the meal progressed, Millicent turned her attention like a knife. Garrett, you look tired. Running both ranch and mercantile must be too much for one man, especially one alone. Evangeline set down the wine bottle. Alone? He has me now. And judging from supper tonight, I'd say 2 hands are already better than a dozen idle mouths. Garrett looked up at Evangeline with something new in his eyes. Gratitude. Millicent flushed. I merely meant that a man in his position might benefit from proper society, real companionship, not hired help. Oh, I'm quite real, Evangeline assured her, and my companionship seems to suit him fine. The accounts are balanced, the house is managed, and the meals are hot. Tell me, Mrs. Fairchild, what more does proper society offer? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up for someone who's forgotten how to stand up for themselves. The exchanges continued, each of Evangeline's responses sharper than the last. When Quentin suggested folks in town might talk, she replied, They already do, but at least when they speak of me, they'll remember my words. Yours vanished like smoke in the wind. Garrett laughed, a low sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. He looked at Evangeline across the table, and their eyes locked. In his gaze, she saw surprise, appreciation, and something warmer that made her breath catch. After the guests left, Garrett leaned against the doorframe, shaking his head. Lord above, I haven't enjoyed a family dinner in 5 years. They're awful people, Evangeline said simply. You stood up for me, against my own family. Why? Evangeline met his gaze steadily. Because you bought me for $25 when Cornelius Briggs would have bought me for less, and I'd be in a much darker place right now. Because you've treated me fairly when you could have treated me like property. Because beneath all that grief you carry, you're a decent man, and decent men deserve better than to be mocked at their own table. They began gathering dishes together. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same plate. Neither pulled away immediately. The contact lasted only seconds, but both felt it like a spark of static electricity. Good night, Miss Hartwell, Garrett said quietly. Evangeline stood alone with the dishes, her heart beating faster than it should. He's not the man I feared. He's the man I could want. And Lord help me, I think I do. December deepened. Garrett began taking Evangeline with him to town. At first it was practical. She needed to understand the mercantile's operations. But as weeks passed, her presence became something more than necessity. Gradually, conversation emerged. One morning, Evangeline asked about his wife. Catherine grew up in St. Louis, city girl. The frontier was hard for her. The isolation, the endless work. Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. Flash flood took her in June of '80. By the time I reached her, she was already gone. I'm sorry. I should have gone with her. Should have known the creek would be dangerous. Should have... You can't spend your life carrying should-haves, Evangeline said quietly. They'll break. You down like water on stone. How did you do it? Set them down? I haven't completely, but I stopped letting them make all my decisions, stopped living in the past when the present demanded attention. She looked at him directly. You're still living in '80. It's '82 now, 2 years gone. Something in Garrett's posture shifted, as if he had heard something he needed to hear. The past can teach us, but it shouldn't imprison us. Every sunrise offers a choice, remain frozen or begin to thaw. At the mercantile, Evangeline transformed the business. She talked to customers, remembered their names, asked about their families. She made recommendations based on actual needs rather than profit margins. Within a month, sales had increased by nearly a sixth. One afternoon in mid-December, they stopped by Kettle Creek on the way home. The day had warmed unexpectedly. Evangeline knelt by the bank, washing flour dust from her hands in the cold water. Garrett stood behind her, watching. His eyes followed the curve of her neck, where her braid had fallen forward. Evangeline felt his gaze like heat against her back. She turned her head slightly. "Something on your mind?" Garrett's throat went dry. "Just thinking about how different things are now, since you came." Evangeline stood slowly, turning to face him fully. "Different how?" Garrett took a step closer, then another. "I stopped counting the days since she died, started counting the days since you arrived instead." He kissed her, not tentatively, but like a man who had been starving and finally found sustenance. His hand came up to cup the back of her neck. Evangeline's hands found his shoulders, then slid around his neck, pulling him closer. Heat flooded through her body. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Garrett's forehead pressed against hers. "We should head back," Evangeline whispered, though she made no move to step away. "Let them talk." "You're not worried about your reputation?" "I stopped worrying about that the moment you put my cousins in their place." He pulled back just enough to look at her properly. "Evangeline, I've had 2 months to think, every morning watching you move through my house, every evening listening to you hum while you work, every night knowing you're sleeping one door down from mine. I'm done thinking." "Then kiss me again," she said, "before I lose my nerve." He did. The weeks leading up to Christmas transformed the ranch. Garrett smiled more. The ranch hands noticed. Garrett and Evangeline were careful around others, but in stolen moments, their eyes spoke volumes. One evening, Garrett found himself in his study, staring at the photograph of Catherine on his desk. The shawl still lay folded beside it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I tried to stay frozen, I did, but she thawed me out whether I wanted it or not." In the silence, Garrett felt something shift. Not forgiveness, he had done nothing requiring it, but rather release. Permission to move forward without guilt. He picked up the shawl and folded it carefully into the trunk at the foot of his bed. The photograph he moved to the mantel in the parlor, still present, still honored, but no longer dominating his personal space. When Evangeline entered the study the next morning, she noticed immediately. "You moved it. Time to make room for the present." He crossed to where she stood. "Evangeline, we need to talk." "That sounds ominous." "Folks in town are talking about us, about you living here under my roof with only a labor contract between us." He stepped closer. "You're not just labor to me anymore. Haven't been for weeks, if I'm honest. I bought you for $25 because it was the right thing to do. But I'd pay $25,000 to keep you now, if that's what it took. I want you, not as hired help, not as a convenience, as my wife." Silence stretched between them. Evangeline's breath caught audibly. "You're asking me to marry you." "I am." Evangeline thought of the auction platform where she had stood 3 months ago, certain her life was over. She thought of the cold ride to the ranch, sitting beside a stranger. She thought of the slow thawing of his grief, the gradual building of trust, the unexpected fire that had sparked between them. "I have conditions," she said. "Conditions? First, I want equal say in ranch decisions. Second, your cousins are never staying overnight in this house. Third, I want children, at least 2. Garrett's expression softened. "Agreed to all." "And fourth," Evangeline stepped closer, placing her hand against his chest. "You have to promise me something, that you won't let guilt rule you, not guilt over your first wife, not guilt over buying me, not guilt over being happy again. Promise me you'll let yourself live fully, not just exist." Garrett's hand covered hers. "I promise, on one condition of my own. You promise the same thing. You've carried your own burdens. Let them go. With me." Tears pricked Evangeline's eyes. "I promise." Garrett pulled her into his arms. "Is that a yes then?" "Yes. It's a yes." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, sealing the promise between them. "We'll go to town tomorrow," Garrett said. "Talk to Preacher Henderson. Get it done properly." "That fast? I've wasted 2 years being frozen. I'm not wasting another day." "When you finally find what you've been searching for, don't hesitate. Life is too short to waste on fear. They married on a cold December morning, with only Preacher Henderson, his wife, and the 3 ranch hands as witnesses. When Preacher Henderson pronounced them married, Garrett kissed his bride with such thorough enthusiasm that Marcus chuckled and Daniel whistled. The months that followed brought changes that rippled outward from the ranch. Spring arrived with green grass and new calves. Evangeline discovered she was with child in April. Garrett pressed his face against her stomach and whispered promises to the life growing there. In November, she delivered a daughter. They named her Rose. Garrett held his newborn with shaking hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "She's perfect." "She's ours," Evangeline corrected, exhausted but smiling. 18 months later, a son followed. They named him James. The ranch prospered beyond expectation. With Evangeline managing the books and business relationships, they expanded their cattle operation and opened a second mercantile. The Thornwood name became synonymous with fair dealing and quality goods. By the time Rose was 3 and James was toddling, the ranch had become a center of frontier hospitality. Neighbors sought Evangeline's advice on household management and business matters. Garrett's opinion on cattle and land management was valued throughout the territory. One evening, as sunset painted the prairie gold and red, Garrett stood on the porch watching his children play. Evangeline joined him, and his arm came naturally around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about that day?" Evangeline asked quietly. "The auction?" "Sometimes, usually when I'm feeling particularly grateful." Garrett turned to look at his wife, his expression tender. "That I had $25 in my pocket, that I was in town that day, that you were brave enough to build a life from nothing. I think I'm the grateful one. You could have been anyone, Cornelius Briggs or worse. But I wasn't. No, you were exactly who I needed." They kissed, soft and sweet, while their children played and the prairie wind sang through the grass. Life had given them both harsh lessons, but it had also given them each other, and that, they both agreed silently, was worth every hardship that had come before. Your story isn't over. Whatever platform you're standing on today, whatever auction block of circumstance or hardship, remember this: the best chapters often begin at the darkest moments. Choose courage. Choose hope. Choose to keep building, even when the ground feels uncertain beneath your feet. From $25 in an auction platform grew a marriage forged in respect, tempered by fire and strengthened by choice, and that is the only truth that matters. What will you choose today? Will you let your past define you, or will you step forward into the life you deserve? The choice, as it always has been, is yours.